get started.
Hey everybody, hope you enjoyed last week's episode with Shawn Pardazi. If you did, get ready, because here comes part 2 with Shawn, here on Texas Narcos Podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to this week's episode of Texas Narcos Podcast. We are back with Shawn. I can't say his whole name again, so we're just going to call him Shawn. You doing all right?
Doing good, thank you.
Good, man. Hey, so we talked about a lot on our last episode. This time, I want to jump right back into the middle of it, kind of where we left off last time. So, people over here will talk about if these people who are Muslims, if they're not aligned with the terrorism and the terrorists, and they're not extremists, how come they don't denounce and stand up against, the terrorism and all the bad stuff that these guys are doing? Is there some insight into that you can share with us?
There is, and I'm glad you asked that question, because I get this question all the time, right? What people have to realize is, when I say have to realize, it's taken into consideration, right? When you're dealing with the Middle Eastern community, regardless of what their ethnicity is, there are several factors that play a role into why there's not a lot of speaking out against certain things.
Like outrage and...
I'm sorry?
Like outrage.
Like outrage, yeah, right.
Yeah.
And a lot of it has to do with the tribal codes that are in place. Okay. If we look at it from a Western perspective, an American perspective, right? And I want you to understand, when I say you, whoever's watching or listening, in the American society, in the Western society, once you turn 18 years old, you're responsible for your own actions.
Okay.
Right? So, and I want to kind of start and set the framework to understand. Let's say you have 3 brothers, right? Your parents are good people. All your siblings are good people. And your middle brother decides he's going to get on drugs and go rob stores.
Okay.
Right? And he's, let's say, 23 years old.
Right.
When the people in your community find out about that and they see the arrest, they're just going to say, oh, that's one of the Johnson boys.
Yeah.
Right? But it stops there. Well, he's one of the oddballs. He's the black sheep of the family. There's a distinct disconnect from the rest of the family.
Yeah.
In the Middle Eastern culture, and it has nothing to do with religion, because it's shared across all the way from Asia over into the Balkans and, even into Russia. What an individual does reflects on the entire family.
Okay.
Right? So, because of it brings shame.
Okay.
Correct? A lot of times when someone does something in the name of religion, most people who practice the Islamic religion are Middle Eastern.
Right.
Okay. When I say Middle Eastern, I don't mean Arab. I'm talking the entire region. You're talking, I shouldn't even say Middle Eastern. I should say more of like a South Asian, all the way into the Balkans, all the way to North Africa.
Because there's a difference between Arabs and Persians and and people from Afghanistan. And and that's something we can get into here in a minute too. Because I think a lot of people over here in America, they just assume if your skin is darker brown and you've got a name that we can't pronounce,
you're Arab. You're Arab.
Yeah, right.
You're Arab. Right. You're one of them damn Arabs.
Yeah, you like eating at Hamas. You go into the restaurant, you order some Hamas.
Talk about that. Okay. This is a good way to start this one. So back in 2008, I believe, I was with I was assigned to one of the 3-letter agencies, and we were in Dallas.
Yeah.
Right. So, and I don't know if it's still there or not. I haven't been there in a long time. And I think Dinger is going to probably kick my ass for saying this. And I don't know if anybody who knows Dinger. He's a big, tall, corn-fed redneck, was in the army. He's got tattoos. He spent 6 years in Erbil, Iraq. So he's been to Iraq. He was with one of the contractors, training the Kurdish police and stuff like that. So this was, so anyway, I was up here for a meeting, and he was with me.
Yeah.
And we go to this restaurant called Fatty's, right? Which is kind of like Damasi's or, one of the, kind of like a Ryan Steakhouse where you go in and you order whatever the hell you want and you pay at the end and you sit down and eat. And the way it's set up is you walk in and this whole restaurant has got a glass front, right? I mean, it's in the shopping center.
Yeah.
All glass. And this is I think it was on a Tuesday at lunchtime around the Galleria where there's a lot of businesses. Yeah. So there's a lot of business people in here. And at lunch hour in Dallas, at like 11:45, it just gets packed. Right. And then at 1 o'clock, it's boom, gone.
Right.
So we come in. There's a huge line. He's in his sheriff's department uniform. I'm in uniform that says 3-letter agency on it. Right. Long story short, we come up to the counter. And the guy who's working behind the counter. And the first set of dishes you get is your paste, like your hummus and your baba ganoush and all these different ones. And Dinger, he's really loud. You ever been around those country folk? They talk like this. They really loud, and you can hear them everywhere they go. Not necessarily that accent, but that type of deep voice.
Yeah.
And he goes, "What's that?" And I said, "That's hummus." And he goes, "A what?" I said, "Hummus." He goes, "Hamas?" Well, here's the problem. The people who are working there, they're Lebanese.
Okay.
They're Shia.
Okay.
Hamas is Sunni.
Okay. Like oil and water?
Like oil and water.
Yeah.
And you could tell when he says Hamas, even the guy behind the counter, he looks up at him. There's a guy just, 10 feet away on the gyros machine, the shawarma machine, and he's using, he's sharpening his knife with that little thing, and he's pulling it, and he just like turns around and looks over, and I'm like, oh shit, this is about to go south.
That's hilarious.
So I tell him, I said, David, shut your mouth, man, shut your mouth. I said, that's hummus. He can't speak it well. He's so loud that when you look over your shoulder, there's a bunch of people sitting down. And the people who are frequenting these places, most of them, especially around the Galleria area, they're not Middle Eastern. They're like all walks of life. Yeah. White folks, black folks, Asian folks. And it's just from all business people.
Yeah.
They're just going for a quick lunch. And so finally we get through, we pay, we go sit down. And Nigger decides he's going to make a damn taco.
A burrito out of some flatbread
so they give you this fresh pita bread. Yeah. And so I see him put it on there. I'm saying, the poor guy doesn't know how to make a shawarma sandwich. But what gets me is as we're sitting, and there's a couple of other guys from another agency that meet us over there, and they know this shit's going south, right? Because I'm gonna have to give them a hard time. But he asked for picante sauce to put on, and we're in a Middle Eastern restaurant, and I'm like, Dinger, dude, we're not in a Mexican restaurant, bro. He wants salsa to put on.
Need some paste picante to put on it.
And then he asked for some sriracha sauce. Anyway,
so he's sitting there eating his burrito and wants some.
Yeah, he was literally trying to make a freaking Mexican taco, a big gordita or something out of it. That's and he's asking for stuff. It's kind of like going to the sushi restaurant and asking for barbecue sauce.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Well, I'm glad you told that story, because I think just that illustrates kind of what we're going to talk about now is the cultural ignorance of a lot of us over here in America to the nuances and the way of life overseas that can affect us here. He called it Hamas, even though it was hummus.
Right.
I probably don't even say it right. And the people that were there probably took offense to that.
They did.
Right.
They did, yeah.
And so us over here in the West, a lot of us don't know these things.
Right.
Us in law enforcement, the general public.
Right.
So that's a good way to segue into the question I want to know is, one, actually, I think before we go into the different groups that are over there, I think what we probably need to talk about is the difference between Arab, Persians, all the different I don't even know if you'd call those ethnic groups.
Yeah, different tribes, different ethnicities.
And then within that, there's different cultural norms in each one.
Yes.
And then you can probably even break it down even further by the religion, right?
Yes.
So,
yeah. But before we get into that, I never did answer the question why you have Muslims that don't stand up.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because here's a problem when you get two cops with ADHD trying to talk about something complex. You know, you squirrel hole. You go somewhere. I just remember
we'll go back to
culture.
We'll talk about that now, and then we'll get into culture.
Right. So the reason why you don't see a lot of Muslims do that is because there's this tribal loyalty culture, and then there's the tribal shame culture.
Okay.
And when you talk about tribal loyalty, tribal shame, one of the things you see in that is the honor killings. It's the tribal honor.
Right.
Okay. So when you have a terrorist organization do something, right, from the religious perspective, there is a expectation that you don't trash talk someone else who calls themselves Muslim, because there are texts that says that if you as an individual Muslim call someone else a Muslim, you're committing a sin. Call someone else is not a Muslim, you're committing a sin. Like if you takfir someone, which is called takfir, you're committing a sin. So people who are very loyal to the tribe or to the religion, they refrain from doing that. What they not realize is in the West, silence means affirmation.
Right.
Right? Because if someone goes and in the Western culture, if someone is wearing a crucifix and says that I'm I follow Jesus Christ, but then he goes and bombs an abortion clinic, you're going to have priests and preachers stand up and say, hey, this dude is not a Christian. Right. He's not doing anything that the Christian would do, because you don't have that tribal honor culture and the tribal loyalty culture here, because America is not a tribal society.
Right.
It is a secular, nationalistic society, right? Regardless of what creed you come from, what religion, everything relies on you being an American.
You identify as an American.
You identify as an American. And now this actually puts us into the other realm of speaking about these tribal and ethnic loyalty things that you were talking about. So the problem is, it's not that there are not Muslims who disagree with all that. It's just they're afraid to say anything. And this is where the honor comes in, because if they go against publicly, and I want you to kind of step back and look at where are the largest Middle Eastern communities. We look at Dallas-Fort Worth right now. Yeah. Most Middle Easterners are going to live in Collin County or Eastern Dallas County, some in Rockwall County. If you look at the map of DFW, most of your Middle Easterners live somewhat, if we're looking at, and this is going to be backwards on the video, so I'm looking at it from my perspective, the center being DFW Airport, right? Dallas is here. Fort Worth is here, right? So for the viewers, you would have to flip it over, right? So east is Dallas, west of DFW Airport is Fort Worth. When you go kind of northeast, Highway 75, 610, not 610, 635. I'm getting mixed up with Houston. And then you get up to George Bush Turnpike. Most Middle Easterners live in this northeast area, right? Okay. Within that northeast area, you have a lot of different backgrounds. You have Persians, you have Somalis, you have Pakistanis, you have Afghanis, you have Azerbaijanis, you have you have Palestinian, you have Lebanese, you have Egyptian, and the best way I always tell people, you want to know where all the Middle Easterners are? Go somewhere, whichever city you're in, and literally get on Google and put Arabic restaurants. And you will see all of them go in one corner.
Prime example, we were eating at the restaurant last night, and there was a whole table of folks that were dressed up in their traditional, all the women had on the
hijab
and stuff. But to me, they appeared to be black, which, I mean, they were black.
Right.
But you told me that they were from
Somalia.
Right. And then at another table, you had a different group of people that were from, wherever.
Different place. Yeah. Right. There were some Egyptians there. I could tell just by looking at them, because it is such a ethnic culture where a lot of intertribal marriages don't happen, at least overseas.
Yeah.
Where they possess a certain muscular structure,
Right.
genetic makeup. So
kind of like the American Indians would.
Right.
To tell the difference between this tribe or that tribe.
Right. Because of the genes remaining in that particular thing. So what you see here is an outward display of a hijab, which basically I'm going to end up knocking this hat off. So you see an outward display of hijab. You identify a person as a Muslim, right? From a Middle Eastern perspective, we don't see that as a Muslim per se. We see that as a specific tribe.
I got you.
Right. And some of that changes based on the type of dress that they wear.
Mm-hmm.
Like a Pakistani Muslim is going to have the hijab, but there's going to be a different design of the outer garments. Right.
Okay.
A Somali Muslim is going to have the hijab, but it's going to be even put on differently.
Right.
An Iranian Muslim is going to have a hijab or a chador, but it's put on differently, right? And it may have some tribal connection to it as to how it's designed. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. So it really takes a Middle Easterner who's familiar with all of that. But it's also sad to say that a lot of Middle Easterners aren't familiar with the other subcultures. I have a unique position. Not only I've been over there, I grew up over there. I've also been to a lot of different countries.
Right.
And I had family that were Palestinian. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So I've been to the West Bank. I've been to Gaza. I've been to Israel. I've been to Syria. I've been to Saudi. I've traveled. I've been to Jordan, Lebanon. Not that much in Lebanon. I was just kind of at the edge. You know what I'm saying? But I also have a lot of Lebanese friends.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So I'm able to tell the difference from a different perspective.
Right.
Now, why do people not stand up? What I was trying to say is, like, when you go, we were talking about like Northeast Dallas, Fort Worth. And I'll use that as an example, and then we'll use Dearborn, because everybody knows Dearborn is basically like little Arabia of the United States.
Yeah.
Right. When people come here and they're tribal, they kind of stick together. So if they run a business, I would say 90% of their customers are going to be Middle Easterners.
Okay.
Right. If they run a car dealership, 90% of their business is going to be with Middle Easterners.
Okay.
Right. If they're doctors, 90% of their patients are going to be Middle Easterners, right? Because they draw from that community.
Mm-hmm.
So to keep the honor and not get shunned, when something happens, they remain quiet. Because if they say something and they offend someone, it has repercussions when it comes to business. And it gets so deep where, let's say, and I'll give you a hypothetical, let's say you have a surgeon in Dearborn, or let's say Plano, Texas. And let's say that surgeon is Palestinian.
Okay.
And this is a hypothetical. That surgeon has 3 daughters and a son. They're not married. They still live at home. They may be in their 20s. That's normal, right? It's not like the U.S. where you're 18, you get your ass out of the house and go live on your own. You still have that tribal connection.
Yeah.
Let's say that Hamas did October 7th, and that doctor says, this is not us, they don't represent Palestinians and things like that. What ends up happening, and let's say he's from the West Bank, but then you have another Palestinian there who's from Gaza. That happens to be his patient.
Yeah.
He hears him say that, where not only he's lost business, he will go tell all the rest of the Palestinians that this guy is not only supporting us, he's a jasus. A jasus means an informant. And in that culture, it's kind of like snitches get stitches concept we have over here with the prisoners.
Yeah.
But this is more of a tribal. So now you've showed disloyalty to it. Now, you can disagree. You just got to keep your mouth shut. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because what ends up happening is not only it affects business, the community will now start talking bad about that whole family. So guess what? His 3 daughters are going to have a hard time finding a husband.
Wow.
His son is going to have a hard time finding a wife.
Wow.
Because unlike what you and I know, and it's kind of weird because I understand both cultures, right?
Yeah.
If you like someone, you talk to them.
Yeah.
You hit it off. You conversate. You and them decide if you're going to get married. At some point, you're going to tell your parents, hey, I want to marry Melissa or whoever.
Yeah.
They really don't have a say-so.
Right.
That's not how it works in the Middle Eastern culture. Mm-hmm. And when I say Middle Eastern, it has nothing to do with religion. It has to do with the tribal culture.
Right.
You don't have a choice. They have to approve. As a matter of fact, if you want to go marry someone, depending on how culturally complex they are, mm-hmm. you can't even go out on a date with her unless you get permission from the dad.
Wow.
And it's not that you can just go ask the dad. You have to go with your father and talk to her father.
Wow.
To get the approval to take her out on a date.
And that's not a religious thing. That's a cultural thing.
It is.
So you could be a Christian in the Middle East and have the same expectations.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. Now, it depends on where. If you're in a smaller city, yes. Some of the bigger cities like Beirut and Amman and, some of the bigger cities, they're not that bad because they've had Western influence to understand, hey, that person is an adult, but there's no hanky-panky.
Well, that's the same thing over here. If what's culturally acceptable in
Houston,
in Houston or in Dallas or in New York City is not going to be the same cultural norms that are accepted in small town East Texas.
Center, Texas.
Right. Like
Hearn, Texas.
Right. Like
Iran, Texas. It's funny you talk about Iran.
Yeah.
I remember when I first got in law enforcement and I started in a little town north of College Station. And one guy was like, "Where you from, boy?" And I said, "I'm from Iran." "I know a fella in Iran. He work at the oil field." And I'm thinking, it's talking about Middle East because oil field, right? I was like, "Oh, yeah, what part?" And he goes, "Iran." And I was like, "But what part? Like, Iran is big." He goes, "Iran ain't that big. It's a little bitty old town.
Just outside of Sheffield."
He goes, "I'm talking about Iran in Texas." And I said, "Wait, there's an Iran, Texas?" Like, I have no clue.
Yeah.
Right?
That's funny.
It's so funny, dude.
Yeah. I went to we actually had a family reunion years ago that I went to, and it was in Iran because that's where all my people are from, out there in West Texas.
So you know where I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Well, you talk about culture. The culture in Iran ain't the same as in Houston.
No. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's, yeah. And then the towns, so like the town I grew up in, the culture there, it's a town about 30 miles outside of Austin, right? The culture back when I was in high school, growing up, is completely different than it is now. Because of all the outsiders coming in from Austin, people from California, Tesla, and all that,
Yeah, it brought a different culture in, which made everybody else be aware of other things. Right. So things that would be looked at that would be frowned upon 20 years ago are normal now.
Right. And the town that I live in now, not the town I grew up in, it's a different town. It is still very much old school, where if you're not from there, you are still considered an outsider.
Mm-hmm. And there are cities like that. Like I lived in Mississippi for 13 years, and depending on where you were at, there were certain cities in Mississippi where it doesn't matter. You could have lived there for 30 years, and you could have married into.
Yeah.
And nothing against them personally. I'm just saying that's how thick and rich the local culture is. That you're never accepted as one of the locals.
Yeah. And another example of this, without getting very specific, is the church that I attend. The person who started that church, we're going to go back, say, 25 years. When they started that church in that small town, it's a non-denominational church. It was the first one ever to happen or to be started in that town. So the Catholics and the Lutherans and the Methodists, they wanted to string that guy up and, put him on display, right? Because he was bringing this craziness into their town, right? Like it was completely ostracized and blackballed, and the person that I'm talking about worked at the school, and that didn't last very long after that. So like the whole community just
turned against,
yeah.
And that's similar to how the Middle Eastern culture works.
And so now let's fast forward 25 years. That church, it's the same name. It's not the same person that's in charge of it anymore, but it's completely accepted now.
Yes.
They're all that old thinking, the old mentality of, them they're just accepted as another church now. right?
Their foundational loyalty to that particular culture has kind of, I wouldn't say dissipated, but it's become more aware that not everybody's the same.
Right.
Right. And if you see that, it kind of works if you apply it to the Middle East. You have countries like UAE, right? United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, even Saudi now. Because a lot of their people who are in their 30s, late 20s, 30s, and early 40s came to the United States and the Western society and countries and became educated, they took some of that culture back with them, so they progressed.
Right.
But if you go to, let's say, western part of Iraq, right, and Salahuddin province, you still have the village mentality.
Right.
Another example of it is Afghanistan.
Right.
If you're in Kabul, you may have some external influence, but you go 30 miles outside of Kabul, you're in a village. Right. These are the people who are still using a donkey to carry their water and their food from the river over to, you know what I'm talking about? Yeah. So evolution comes with exposure to the outside world.
Right.
What we're facing now here is you've had Middle Easterners and Muslims here since the late 1800s.
Yeah.
Okay. The problem has been people aren't familiar. Right. So the fear that it's causing for the people in the United States is the only exposure they've had to Middle East and Islam, so to say, is because of conflicts.
Right.
Wars. Right.
Right.
It started out with the Islamic Revolution and the taking of 400-something hostages in 1979. So imagine somebody in Houston, Texas, you've got Middle Eastern people who've lived here for a long time, right? Professors, doctors at MD Anderson, half the freaking doctors are Middle Eastern.
Right.
But they've never engaged in that type of conversation with them. But then all of a sudden you open up the news and Middle Easterners took hostages the Americans. So the national identity kicks in. They want to blame something. And the only thing they can think of is the name Islamic Revolution. Boom. That's the problem. Islam.
Right.
You see
Just like after World War II, or during World War II, after Pearl Harbor, they're like, oh, the Japanese guy who lives down the street, he might be one of them.
Yeah, right. And the reason for that is, if you look at the Japanese are kind of tribal too.
Yeah.
They don't come to the United States and start assimilating with people and try to teach people other things. Well, you've got to, I looked it back. Actually, if you look up the city, Michigan City, Indiana, is actually one of the original cities that most of the Arabs went to. And the reason I found out is I was doing a class about 3-4 years ago up there in that area, and I was in Michigan City. I was like, I wonder how far I'm from Detroit. I try to go eat like Middle Eastern food wherever I'm at, and it was too far away. So I just went into Google and I put Mediterranean.
Yeah.
There was like 3 Mediterranean restaurants popped up, and I looked at it and I was like, hold on, wait a minute. This is an actual Iraqi. And I could tell just by what they had that it was a Chaldean store. It was Iraqi Christians. So I went to the restaurant. It's a little bitty old restaurant. It's been there for a long time. It's been there since like 1961.
Right.
And I got to talking to the girl that was working, the waitress, and she told me that her grandparents or great-grandparents or somebody had came here in the early 1900s.
Wow.
Right? And that's why that's a huge population up there, is because if you look at like Chrysler, Ford, most of those people came here to work. Otherwise, why in the hell a bunch of Arabs come over here and go to Michigan of all places with 7 foot of snow?
Right.
We ain't got no snow overseas. That's got to start. I would see everybody moving to Phoenix.
Right.
It's more desert. Right. It's kind of like,
right.
But they went up there. But the problem has been the whole time they were here, they never went outside at that tribal culture. So when something like the 1979 revolution happens and all the people get kidnapped or hostage, and then you have 9/11 happen, the only exposure that the Americans have is to the negative aspect. Right. And to parallel that is if the news only covers robberies, carjackings, and is constantly showing black people. For people who live in small town United States that don't have any blacks.
Right.
When they go to a big city and they see a black person, they're automatically suspicious. Because it's kind of like Pavlov's dog's theory of conditioning.
Yeah.
The result that they get is the fear, but it's reinforced by constant introduction of a specific action, and its byproduct is, oh, it's a black guy, it's a black guy, it's a black guy.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So when you don't know anything, when a person doesn't know anything about culture, about religion, and the only thing they see is atrocities, and it's got the name Islam attached to it, you can't blame them for being afraid, right? So this is where I'm always thinking to myself, why don't the Muslim community stand up and say something? But I also have to be cognizant of the fact that most of these people, their businesses rely on other people. So that tribal culture and the tribal shame, the fear of that tribal shame comes into play.
Yeah.
Because another element you got to think about is you do have a lot of terrorist sympathizers in the United States, because some of these people can't separate politics from religion.
Right.
They blame everything that happens in the Middle East on America.
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying? Even to the part of drawing the country lines.
Yeah.
And we can get into that because I'll tell you about the Kurdish people.
Yeah.
Right. They're spread across 4 different countries. So what happens is they blame the United States. So if you speak against any of that, to say, hey, this is not us, this is you know what I'm saying? They're crazy. The repercussions comes into play, because not only it affects them here, if they have family overseas, that family is going to get targeted. So not only it affects their business here, their marriages and all the interactions with the Middle Eastern community here, if they have family over there, those other people will tell them, hey, these people are from Karachi. They live in this neighborhood. So then the word gets out over there. It's kind of like small town America.
Yeah.
Right? If you're in Carthage, Texas, right? And everybody knows who you are.
Right.
And one of your kids is doing something that the people in Carthage don't like.
Yeah.
But the kid's got family, and let's say the kid lives in Longview. He does something in Longview that just makes the family look bad. Everyone in Carthage will disassociate from that family.
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying? Because it's the old saying, and you hear that in the country life here too, is, well, your mama didn't raise you right.
Yeah.
Well, you apply that if you have siblings, that means if she didn't raise you right, she also didn't raise them right.
Yeah.
So you guys all possess the same ideology.
Right.
And that's, so when you look at that, you're kind of like, why aren't they saying anything? And you're kind of like, is it because they're afraid? I can tell you right now, 99% of the time, that's the problem.
Right.
The people who do stand up are the people like me, who, first of all, what are they going to do to me?
Right.
Come with it.
Yeah.
But we're in America.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Come with it.
Yeah.
Come with it. Because that shit doesn't work on me.
Yeah.
Right? I'm kind of like a hybrid between the two. I understand it, but I'm also not intimidated.
Right.
If you don't want to associate with me, that's all right. Go to Hoover Dam, take a leap of faith.
Right.
You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's how much I care.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's there's just so much that, I think people here don't understand, about the why.
The why. The why is the most important thing.
And that's, we've had some conversations offline about the why, and hopefully in this next little part, we'll talk about the why to help us understand these different terrorist groups, as to why they are the way they are and why they do what they do, to ultimately help us as cops, not only cops, but the general public, be able to identify people that are up to no good,
right,
and be able to separate them from the innocent, Middle Eastern person,
yeah.
Right? You talk about kind of going back to people who are listening, which a lot of my audience is like interdiction officers and stuff, trying to separate the smuggler from the innocent motoring public.
Right.
And they're, they teach all the classes that you go to. They talk about that, how to differentiate between this is the innocent motoring public, and this is how the innocent person reacts or acts and does, and this is the way a smuggler would act,
right,
to get you to go down that trail. The same thing, I think, is, going to be important, especially in today's day and age with all this, everybody's talking about terrorism right now, and, ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and it's really big topic is, how do we as cops and as the general public, how do we educate ourselves to be able to say something if we see something,
right, and
not just calling on our Muslim neighbor who's, he's out there with his, he's got his rug and he's praying towards the, I think he's up to no good. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? Like, so
the cop who stops the guy who's got a prayer rug and a Quran, and he's calling me. He's like, hey, I was like, what? He goes, can I ask you a question? I got a guy stopped. He's got a big beard. He's got a prayer rug, and he's being deceptive. And I'm like, okay. And he goes, you think he's a terrorist? And I'm like, well, this depends on what you're asking.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you don't understand the culture, here's the problem. I'll read that. I get to that when you're talking about we're taught how to pick out the criminal element in comparison to the innocent person.
Right.
That innocent person, to understand what innocence is, as far as criminal behavior, you basically have to have a model to compare it to. So you look for anomalies in comparison to that model.
Yeah.
Right. With smuggling, with criminal behavior, there's a model of an innocent, law-abiding citizen.
Right.
So anything that diverts from that, which is pretty much most of the time detected through deception, when certain questions are asked, you call it any question that has a consequence.
Right.
The problem in the Western society is there is no model of comparison, especially when it comes to law enforcement. Nobody has ever established that model.
Right.
Right. And the reason that model hasn't been established because nobody's been out there to actually from within the culture come in and say, hey, this is normal. This is normal. This is normal. This is normal. Here's all the normalities. Anything that doesn't fit in any of this is an anomaly.
Right.
Right. Because that's where ideology comes in.
Yeah.
But you have to decipher through language, linguistics, culture, subculture, religious culture, geopolitics culture, ethnic culture. All of these things have to be considered when you're dealing with a criminal, it's just, are they doing something, hiding it or not?
Right.
It's a very simplistic answer.
Yeah. It's not a one-size-fits-all answer.
Exactly.
You can't just put on a class and say, all right, guys, if y'all see this old boy with this, on his car, or he's doing this, he's probably a terrorist. You need to call FBI.
Exactly. Exactly. So they come up with this concept of see something, say something.
Yeah.
What are you seeing?
Right.
Is the question.
Yeah.
Right? How does a person know if what they're seeing is actually an anomaly?
Yeah.
And then the Bureau gets pissed because they get inundated with a bunch of phone calls and they're like, good Lord, man, we just said see something, say something. And we got 17,444 freaking calls coming to the Dallas Field Division with people just calling and saying this dude was playing Arabic music when he was driving down the road.
Right.
And it seemed odd.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So because of that lack of knowledge and lack of right approach, because people don't understand, what is the first thing they default to? Better response. They say they want to be proactive in law enforcement, yet 90% of law enforcement, when it comes to training, is better reaction.
Right.
How is that proactive?
How to respond.
How to respond. You have a school shooting. We need more tactical training.
Right.
You still ain't getting rid of the shooter.
Right.
So what you're trying to tell me is, oh, well, because in Uvalde shit went south, we just got to have better response training. No. How about we go figure out what the freaking problem was with the dude and how to recognize those signs to prevent it from happening.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? When New Orleans happened, everybody's like, I see it. Better shooting, better response to terrorism, Glock transition, better rifle marksmanship, da-da-da-da-da. And then there's another group, how to better secure an event. Okay, so your security event, the guy drives his truck. Who's going to stop him from bringing his cooler in and blowing everybody?
Right.
You see what I'm saying? Instead of attacking the ideology and getting help from the ideological aspect of it to identify people, we're just talking about response. Because this is the culture of law enforcement in the United States. It's constantly just respond. Yeah. It's like a policy manual.
Yeah.
Every time an agency has a policy manual, it's because there's been a fuck up somewhere, and that's their response to it. You see
if
what I'm saying?
If this happens, then you do this.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's been the problem. So the way you got to look at it is, how do we, if we as Americans don't understand the dynamics of all the stuff that I've just mentioned, and what I've mentioned is literally tip of the iceberg.
Right.
It's literally the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
If you look at it as a huge pyramid, I'm literally just talking about that one piece of rock on the top.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
But that piece of rock is sitting on this, all of these different pieces. Underneath, right? Yeah. So if we don't understand the dynamics of all of this, who would understand it?
Well, it's got to be a person who's been in it, because, the outsiders are just going to go based on data.
Based on data, based on statistics, based on what you consider physical characteristics, right? But the people who know it inside out, or at least have more knowledge than a Westerner, is people from within the community. Here's what's happened. The community not assimilating fully, they do assimilate in big cities. So you don't have these problems in bigger cities because people know people learn about cultures, right? But for the most part, the people who could identify these extremists are people from within the community.
Right.
There's a disconnect between community and law enforcement and intelligence. Now, that disconnect could be several different reasons.
Yeah.
The way they were treated, they already disassociate. Or because of tribal loyalty or religious loyalty. You get what I'm saying? So that could be another factor, that they don't want to say anything because of the shame that comes with afterwards.
Right.
Because I can name you just the people I know in Dallas-Fort Worth, probably of the people I know, 100% of them, if they see something, they would actually say something. Now, there are some of them who are like, man, I don't want to call the FBI.
Right.
And I'm like, why? They're like, man, I haven't heard too many good things. As soon as I call the FBI, I'm Muslim. They're going to come over there and talk to me. And then next thing you know, what if the FBI agent just doesn't like Muslims? And then he's going to find something to try to scrutinize me for it. Plus, if people find out I'm talking to the FBI, then I'm going to be named a jasus. And it's going to affect me personally. You see what I'm saying? So there's all of those. So the reality is you have the element in place where they can tell you who the extremists are, but there's a disconnect in communication.
Okay.
And to repair that communication, it takes for people to step out from the community and say, you know what? Forget that tribal shit. We got innocent people dying.
Right.
So we need to say something. Or train the law enforcement and the general public to the norm so they can start recognizing. See, there's not like a one-way solution. It's a both, because lack of knowledge on one side causes havoc and lets things go unnoticed, and lack of trust and cooperation on the other side can limit the amount of information that can be shared.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So it's kind of like one of those both things.
So what could officers do? Let's say you're in a small town America, you're a deputy, or you're, local PD. What could officers do? What would be some good ideas as far as how can a cop go and try to bridge that gap between the cops and the Middle Eastern community, like stopping at the store and talking to them, or getting.
But prior to even doing that, and that's a really good question, prior to even doing that, you don't go engage a specific culture or community without at least having some basic knowledge.
Yeah.
Right.
True.
Because all those dynamics are going to play. If you walk into a gas station, let's say in Newton, Mississippi, and I know all the gas station owners over there, these were all the interstates that I worked. I always went to the Arabic ones and struck up a conversation because you could develop assets like that.
Yeah.
I remember I was assigned to the Fed, so I would be basically the liaison. If they saw something, they would tell me.
Yeah.
They didn't want to call the Bureau. They didn't want to call HSI. They didn't want to call the Feds, but they trusted me. I'm one of them. Right. So if you go to Newton, Mississippi, right, and I'm just using that as an example, and as soon as you take the exit, there's a Chevron station, and the people who run it are Yemeni.
Yeah.
Let's say you're an officer with Newton Police Department. You don't know shit the difference between a Yemeni, a Sudanese, an Algerian, a Moroccan, a Palestinian, or an Afghan.
Yeah.
Or even a Sikh from Punjab province in India.
Right.
You walk in and you see the guy and you just go, "You want them Arabs?" What have you just done?
You just pissed them off.
What you did is you showed your ignorance.
Right.
And the one thing about the Middle Eastern culture, and it goes all across the board, if they think you're ignorant, they don't want to talk to you.
Yeah.
Because they automatically understand that you don't understand complexity. So if they have information, and even though you're there, they may think you're a nice guy. You come and get coffee all the time because that's your beat. They still don't trust you enough because they don't know what you're going to do with the information.
Yeah.
So the remedy to that is educate yourself as law enforcement with the basics, right? That's why I'm building the course for law enforcement. And of course, I've got another one that I'm building for the general public, for parents to be able to, see those signs of if their kids are getting radicalized online, right? But, taking that course, if I walk in and go, "Hey, man, where are you from?" And I don't know, the video that I posted where I stopped that Yemeni guy. right? And I don't know when the viewers, if they're not law enforcement, they don't know what we're talking about, but the law enforcement, they know what I'm talking about. The Yemeni guy, me knowing which province he was from, which city he's from, what religious sect he belongs to, made him feel comfortable enough where he just indulged so much information. There was nothing criminal, nothing suspicious about it. Yeah. It was just the fact that I was able to communicate. Now, the whole time he had no clue I was Middle Eastern.
Right.
Because he thought I was Mexican. Oh. But it was my approach. And if you actually go back and listen, the 2 videos that I talk about, both of them at some time during those videos, they go, how do you know so much? Where are you from? Because they don't expect the Americans to know the complexity. And I always just said, oh, man, I study that stuff. You know, I'll get on Google, or I read this, or I got a friend. Yeah. It wasn't until the end when I tell them, hey, bro, I'm from there, too. And they go, oh, come on, man, for 3 hours we've been talking. You didn't tell me. Because even when I'm talking to them in English, I sound like a redneck. Right. So it's like the perfect chameleon. Yeah. You know?
Yeah. The chameleon cup.
But the bottom line is, to be able to pick out an anomaly, you have to understand some of the norm. Right. And that's the problem in the United States. Is it the fault of law enforcement? Well, no, not really, because, again, we're dealing with an environment and a culture in law enforcement where everything is reactive. Yeah. Right? Is it the fault of the Middle Easterners? Some. Because when they saw the negativity come out in the late 70s, some of them should have stood up. Now, is it totally their fault? No, but I also understand because of their culture and because of the shame culture, they didn't want to get associated with it. So they rely on American government to do the training. Well, here's the problem. When government wants training, they put a lot of emphasis on who is qualified to teach this. What's the first place they go to? U.S. military. Yeah. Right? Or let's learn about Islam, but let's get an evangelical Christian to come and teach about it because he's a theologian. Right. Do you see the problem here?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And I'm not saying anything bad about evangelical Christians. Is you want to know the deep rooted, you got to go within. Right. If I want to learn how the cartel operates, I can't go ask DEA how the cartel operates. DEA doesn't know shit when it comes to the cartel. Some do because they've studied it. But your average Joe relies on what? What an analyst puts out on a freaking data, right? If I want to learn about the cartel, I'm going to talk to the cartel guys that I catch. Yeah. And I want to have them walk me through everything they did because that's how I identify their modus operandi. Right. That's how I identify how they hide things. That's why they register a car to a parking lot that there's nothing there. That's why they put their car to the UPS store and list the box number as their apartment number. Yeah. What is the purpose? Why? Oh, because you don't want to be surveilled. Yeah. You're hiding something. Yeah. You see what I'm saying? So for me to understand that, it has to come from them, not some analyst that goes, they got a UPS store as their address. Why? That's weird. The analyst doesn't know why. She got a degree in, he or she's got a degree in statistics. That's not why. That's a formula.
Yeah. And what you get is you end up having cops, which they don't do that. This isn't as prevalent as it used to be. But I remember the first interdiction class I went to in 2010. They were talking about these. If you see a Tweety Bird sticker, if you see a Ferrari sticker, if you see a single key in the ignition, if you see
don't forget John Deere.
Right.
John Deere.
Like, if you see these things, because that was all data driven.
Yeah, because what has happened, and I talk about that when I was teaching the Smugglers Inc. class, that's one of the things that I talk about is how these so-called physical indicators are just statistical data.
Yeah.
It's common denominators between seizures.
Right.
And let's touch on that for just a second. When we talk about analytical data, they look for common denominators in cases, right? Which is going to lead me into a training I went was terrorism back in 2002, like a year after 9/11. So that data comes. You have an analyst sitting at some fusion center or some whatever, and they get 1,000 seizures, the reports.
Yeah.
And that person says, when I walked up to the car, I saw a Red Bull, I saw a Santa Muerte, and I saw a Rosary.
Yeah.
Right. And this stop is made 50 miles north of Laredo. A logical person would be like, okay, Santa Muerte and Rosary is associated with the Tex-Mex culture or even the northern Mexican culture. That's a cultural attribute.
Yeah.
Right. The Red Bull could be associated with people driving. I drove from my house over here. It was only 5 hours. Hell, I drank a Red Bull on the way.
Yeah.
Right. That's something that could be associated with something. But what happens is you got that seizure that has it. The next seizure has it. A seizure up in Idaho has it. A seizure in Southern California has it. Analytical minds who are thinking about statistics, their mathematical equations, they look for common denominators. That is a term associated with mathematics.
Yeah.
So they look at these common denominators and they say, okay, these are indicators. So look for these common denominators. Therefore, your productivity may go up, right? The reality is none of these people who put these statistics together have ever turned the lights on and made a traffic stop and actually engaged people in interviews.
Yeah.
See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that brings us to this point. 2002, I go to a interdiction class.
Yeah.
And right after 9/11, government being reactive, decides to put a lot of money into giving grants for free interdiction training.
Right.
So that caused a bunch of interdiction training companies that just popped out of nowhere. And they rebranded the name to criminal and terrorism interdiction.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you talk about terrorism, are we talking about ideological aspect? Or are we talking about transporting bombs?
Yeah.
So a lot of people started teaching the same thing they were teaching for smugglers. And then just, let's say, I went to this class that I went to was just a classroom. I think it was 2 or 3 days. And the person was showing pictures of cocaine on the floor, right? Of some sort of Datsun or Nissan. It's a pickup truck.
Yeah.
And it was from the border. And as he showed it, he said, now these kilos could be C4. So as somebody who's involved in a terrorist organization could use a compartment to put C4 in it.
Okay.
And I'm like,
Yeah.
And the response to that, when somebody's like, well, have y'all ever got any of that? His response was, in Afghanistan and in Iraq, that's how they rig up their cars. Okay, that's in a war zone.
Yeah.
Dynamics change.
Yeah.
Okay, number 2. As time goes along, this individual gets into talking about interviewing.
Mm-hmm.
There's 140-something people in this class.
Mm-hmm.
It's a free class, dude.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's sponsored by one of the agencies, and the grant money is paying for it.
Yeah.
And this individual comes out and says, now, this dude, straight up white dude, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, he doesn't even understand country. Like, he wouldn't understand my language, straight up, like, proper English. He says, if you want to stop, and it's a brown guy, and he looks like he's Middle Eastern, and if he mumbles under his breath, Allahu Akbar, meaning Allahu Akbar, shoot him in the head immediately.
Oh, my God.
And I went, oh, shit. I raised my
Question.
He goes, yes. And I said, can you say that again? He says, if you hear a mumble something, and he didn't even say Allahu Akbar. He said, Allah Akbar. You know what I'm saying? Allah Akbar. Doesn't even know how to say it. Whatever.
Yeah.
I said, so you're saying that? He goes, yeah. And I said, and let me get this straight. I'm working on a Sunday at 12:30. I stop a white-haired lady at 12:30, runs a stop sign in her neighborhood. She's going home. She probably just left church.
Yeah.
And I go up to her and say, ma'am, you didn't stop at the stop sign. You need to, I'm just going to write you a warning. She goes, hallelujah. Do I shoot her in the head too? And he goes, well, that's not the same. And I said, but pretty much the same.
Yeah.
Right? And he goes, well, no, but if you watch the videos that the insurgents put out, before they blow themselves up, they say Allahu Akbar. And I'm like, oh my God. And all I'm envisioning is some trooper in Indiana, right, on whatever, stops an Arab dude, walks up to the car, a first-generation Arab, and he says, sir, you were speeding, I'm just going to give you a warning. And the guy says, Subhanallah, Allahu Akbar. And pop him in the head. And I'm like, wow. I had a conversation with him later, and I said, bro, you don't know anything about terrorism. What are you doing teaching?
Yeah.
He said, I have to put the name terrorism in the class to open up funding.
Right.
And that's all it is. So even a reaction to the problem is getting people who have no clue by just playing word games.
Yeah.
What I'm concerned with is the 139 people in the class are going to stop somebody somewhere and pop them in the freaking head.
Yeah.
Because somebody says Allahu Akbar.
Just so the people at home know, can you give us the definition of that term so that we can compare it to Hallelujah?
Yeah. Allah is God.
Mm-hmm.
Akbar means the greatest. God is the greatest.
Oh, okay.
That's what it is.
Right.
And it's funny because people always associate Allahu Akbar to just Muslims.
Yeah.
That's not true.
Okay.
That's not true. The Arab Christians, they also use the same word, Allah. Allah is just basically like saying Dios in Spanish.
Okay.
God in Spanish is Dios.
Gotcha.
Right? In Chinese, I think is Shen Shen or something to that effect. Right? In Farsi is Khuda. Right? In different languages, God is called different. Right?
Yeah.
Some people call Yahweh, whatever. Right? Yeah. It's just different languages.
Yeah.
Right? Arabic is Allah.
Right.
So it doesn't matter if you're Muslim, if you're Christian, now with the Christians, they also, talk about Jesus Christ. But when we talk about God, it's Allah.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So, and I actually have videos from like a Coptic Christian guy that he's got a big beard. If you look at him, he looks like he's Muslim because he's got the big beard and he's wearing the Arab abaya. And he says, hey, I'm a Coptic Christian from Alexandria, Egypt.
Right.
Just because you hear somebody say Allah, that doesn't mean we're Muslim. We use the same word. We're Arabs.
Right.
Right. And these are the things that the Western society doesn't understand because they haven't had exposure to it.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? So my goal, my jihad, as we call it, right? As a patriot, is to educate people, not just in law enforcement, but just the general public, to be able to have enough education to be able to pick out the anomalies. Because at the end of the day, we live here. We don't need no terrorists.
Yeah. And part of picking out the anomaly, too, is getting past the data, getting past the outward expression, the indicators, if you will, and getting to the why.
Yes.
Because if you can figure out the why, you can apply the why to counterterrorism or counter-smuggling. Just like, in the past 10 years, people have been instructing and teaching about the why. Why did you see that single key? Why did you see that sticker? Why did you see that rosary? And so they've been educating cops for the last 10, 15 years on why you saw those things. And then it makes sense that, okay, I saw that. I understand why they had that. It doesn't mean that they're a smuggler. So now I think we're trying to move into a new era here.
Yeah, you're moving into a new era of training.
Right.
Because we can understand what has happened, and I'll close it out for you because I know where you're leading with this. Law enforcement training or any kind of education has always been based on what? Right? What do we look for?
Yeah.
Right? It's never what and why is it there?
Yeah.
Nobody ever knows the why because what is, let's say it's a list of indicators. But even that why is not just to understand it. But for a law enforcement officer, he has to know that why because when you go to court, the why specifies what this resembles.
Yeah.
Not just, I just had all of this, but I have no explanation. It's just somebody with a mathematics degree gave it to me on a list of indicators and said, if you have all of this, you're good to go.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So the why, especially when it comes to terrorism, because it is so in depth.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, we're almost out of time for today. So when we come back next week on the Texas Narcos Podcast, we are going to jump into the why behind the most common terrorist groups that we have operating in our world right now. We're going to talk about Hamas, Hezbollah, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, the Taliban. We're going to talk about the big five that we have in our world right now, and we're going to get into the why and their beliefs, their purpose, the reason that they're in existence, which will explain the why and hopefully educate us on trying to be able to spot them and catch them and hopefully prevent the next incident. So until next time, guys, we'll see y'all down the road on Texas Narcos.